Welcome to Current Issues in Athletic Administration. We are joined this week by Scott Winton, Athletic Director at Livingston High School. Coach, thanks for jumping on.
Yep, thank you.
So let's dive in. I know we just recorded for the other show, and this one's more directed at our athletic administration colleagues. And what I lead with is a question that I got from my friend Anthony Thomas, who's the AD at University of San Francisco. And he asks a really thoughtful question for us to assess how anything's going at any given time. And it is, what weighs most heavily on your mind right now?
That's a pretty open-ended question. I think from like a macro level of like where our school is in our section and the league that we're in, I think we come back to and talking with athletic director colleagues about we just finished up with the fall playoff season and kind of the structure of playoffs in our section and the structure of league in our section. I think the thing that we're wrestling with is how are we grouping schools to compete against each other? And I think we're in at least in our part of the valley in the section, we're in this kind of part where we're still tying it to enrollment. And there are certain schools in the valley that have maybe some really large enrollment numbers. And there are maybe some smaller schools up in maybe the suburbs of Sacramento or the suburbs of Modesto that have maybe not the same type of numbers, but just the maybe a little bit different affluency. And it seems like we're coming back to who are we competing against? Are we competing against? Is it like for, and how do we figure that part out? Is it all enrollment, or are we going to go to some sort of full on competitive equity where I think that's the part that I think we're struggling with and trying to figure out not only what do we want, but what's best for our kids.
Love that.
That's a lot. I know.
No, it's not a lot. I'm just trying to figure out how to land this next part of the equation. So, full transparency. I cut my teeth in the Sac Joaquin section. So I know my first 10 years were spent in that section. And then I've been in the Central Coast section for the last, probably 18 years. And they're run differently and not good, bad, indifferent, whatever. My understanding is that in the Sac Joaquin section, league realignment is all done at the section level still. In our section, you have to apply to be in a league. They have to accept you, and then league realignment is done within the league itself. So we're the Pacific Coast Athletic League, where I live, is a 32 school league that's broken up into divisions by competitive equity for every sport, right? In the Sac Joaquin, right, and excuse me, and up and down the Central Coast section, we have a bunch of other equity leagues as well.
Right.
What is getting in the way of that being embraced at the section level, if that's a place where people feel that's the next step, right? If you're saying the school size equation is broken, right? And there's not an easy solution, but there are other things that could drive the car. Just talk a little bit about how realignment goes on and what you think potentially could be some things to explore.
Yeah, it's different in our section, and we looked at the Central Coast section and used that as a model to try to say, okay, hey, this is probably a better way of doing it. And we went through that. I mean, our process is you turn in your application to, okay, where do you see yourself, school size? Is the school going to be growing over the next 4 years, declining enrollment? Is there another school in your district opening that's going to drop your enrollment by 1,000 kids? When I was at Merced High, we were at like 2,800, and then the third school opened up, and then they were down to 1,800. So they were potentially a Division I school, now a Division III. And then basically all that information goes to the section office, and they come out with their plan and says, this is it. And then you have a series of meetings where you have to go to the meeting and either argue to get out of the league that they put you in, or be at the meeting in case somebody else argues that you should not be in that league. And it's a free for all. I don't know if it's the best procedure or process.
Sitting in that meeting, how would you articulate the competing I want to say agendas because that's definitely not the right word, but voices, right? Where if you, for example, are saying, look, school size is irrelevant, especially down in the valley. And then
Yeah.
you've got somebody else saying, no, school size is indicative of what we should be doing. What are the different perspectives and positions? That's the word I'm looking for, that people stake out in that meeting that causes the tension.
I think there are certain leagues in the valley that have been together for 100 years, that there is just the tradition of just these are the teams that we play. And I think there is a being familiar with those schools, and the tradition of a league like the Valley Oak League is like Oakdale and Manteca. That's a great league. And I think there's always going to be some apprehension about from some of those schools about trying something totally new and maybe losing some of that tradition. The Trans Valley League's another league that's just steeped in tradition. But I don't think what you said in terms of like ulterior motive. I think that in that meeting, there are certain things that are said that you can see ulterior motive. You can, hey, it's plain as day. We were in a position where we were a pretty large school in a small school league that was really competitive. And we were being moved basically up to a league that's a little bit bigger, larger range of enrollment, but it's going to be a lot more competitive for us because the schools that are in our current league are, I use that word like for their kids, our kids, they look the same. I don't care if we're 11, 1,200 kids and we're playing Central Valley, who's 2,400 kids. Our games are going to be competitive. They just are, just because they just are. So I don't know. I think in terms of when we went through that process, there were a number of leagues and athletic directors and schools that were pitching the idea of going to the conference model. Our section put together a conference committee. I was on the conference committee, or am on the conference committee. I just don't think there was the will of the majority of schools in our section, which is about 200. I don't think we have 120 schools that are just willing to just jump in because they see it as they see the great unknown, and they see more problems than solutions. And I don't. I think it could be done really efficiently and ultimately create matchups that are just good for our kids. You go use football as an example in league. You're going to play 6 league games. You're going to be in 5 of them, and maybe you get blown out in one, and maybe you blow somebody out, but they're going to be competitive games.
I think the tricky thing is being in the middle of it is it's imperfect, and you're going from one flawed system to another. And if the question of what's best for kids stays at the center of the equation,
Yeah.
like it's really not that complicated to figure out. And I think you're right. The traditional league, the rivalry games, these things that matter, right? Big picture, should those upend the heavier weight of these other deals, right? So for example, like we have 520 kids and we compete across the board in all of our sports as a small school, but because we're in an equity league, right? In football, we can't play Salinas High School. We have 25 guys on the team,
Right.
right? They have 100, right? That's not a matchup that anyone wants to see, except Salinas is a bad example for us, but except for the school that wants to maintain tradition. What do you want to maintain it? You beat us 70-0 every year. Is that the tradition you want to maintain?
Yeah, yeah, and we were caught in that with football in the last league that we were in. It wasn't, and no fault of our own, but played in the league as a football player in '90. We won the Trans Valley League. We won the section championship in '90. We ended up beating Escalon in the section finals, and Escalon was 600 or 700 kids. We were, I don't know, somewhere similar, but the dynamic of Livingston compared to Escalon at that time or now has just changed. Escalon they beat Buchanan in football 2 years ago. They play a really comprehensive schedule, and the last couple games that we were playing them, it wasn't a good game. It wasn't competitive. And so going into the league, knowing that you're going to get 2 or 3 games like that a season, so what are we doing? There's got to be a better way.
Well, especially in football where there's a safety component of it, where if you're running your 20 guys out against 60, it's just you're asking for trouble, not
Yeah,
just from a competitive standpoint.
yeah, that was tough. And it wasn't just football. There are some other sports that league in volleyball is really good. Ripon High School's been dominant in volleyball. I think I don't know if they're still playing in the NorCal playoffs, or I know they won a section championship. It was just a really good small school league that over the course of, I think, probably 20, 25 years, the towns, and a lot of these towns are still one school towns. And a school like Houston, which is a suburb of Turlock, or a school like Escalon, which is a suburb of Modesto, those schools near Folsom, which is a kind of a suburb of Sacramento, or Vista del Lago. There's these pockets, and it's great. It's a great environment to coach in. It's a lot of support, a lot of opportunity there. But there are some, I don't want to call them like inner city schools that maybe get left behind in that. Some of the rural schools. I don't know. I just that in terms of on my mind, and it's something that we talk about at league meetings. We're in year one of a 4-year realignment. There was talk about trying to transition to some sort of conference model, and the thought is, do we have to do it across 200 schools, or can we do it, say, in the South? Can we just say, hey, we want to pilot this with these two leagues? Let's do an 18 or a 16 team league and try it out. But that's been on our mind the last couple of years.
Interesting. Just so you know, it's not all roses when you do go that route. So you get these other issues that get in the way.
Yeah.
All right. Pivoting from that to what is consuming the majority of your bandwidth. And I'm assuming it's not the same thing. Sometimes what is sitting with us in the back of our mind isn't the thing that's keeping us from being productive. What would you say consumes most of your bandwidth on a day-to-day basis or at this moment in time?
I think I've got like weekly things that I do. Like I just set up that I'm gonna write an athletic newsletter letter every week, and I'm gonna put that out and highlight our kids. One of the best things I did about 6 years ago was I bought a really good camera, and immediately I'm a much better photographer now that I have good equipment, and so I'll go out and shoot pictures of games and put together some game stories and highlight kids once a week. And I know that it's one of those things that I don't want to say I don't look forward to doing it, but I know I got to do it every week. And those things that you just got to do every week, it's a couple hours. That along with try to stay 2 weeks ahead of our coaches in everything, like 2 weeks ahead of, okay, now you should be checking your kids' grades because the quarter grades are coming up, or semester grades are here. This is when you need to start having these conversations with individual kids. Spring sports, we're looking at turning in transportation requests at this date to get them in on time so we can secure transportation. Trying to think ahead to stay ahead of what our coaches need by 2 or 3 weeks. So those are like the weekly things that you still have to, that I want to commit to doing, but then they're still managing okay, I got to make sure I have officials tomorrow because I have 4 soccer games and a wrestling 6-way. I want to make sure that our student support secretary who oversees transportation is out. I got to make sure that we have transportation. So there's the kind of the management and the leading, and you can't do one without the other. And sometimes if you get too heavy on one side or the other, either managing things or really taking a step and leading the athletic department, one of them falls. So I would say bandwidth wise, it's trying to balance those two things.
Yeah. And I think to your point, there are things that creep up in front of us that we're knocking down as they come, right? And there are those other ones that are on our list of like, all right, this is something I want to flush out. And do you ever get a chance to get to it because these other things are getting in the way, right? And you mentioned the photography piece. Have you considered, or do you use your student body to help capture photos that then you can repurpose for the social media?
Yes, but their equipment isn't as good as mine. So my setup's pretty good, and I a lot of times going to a game, I'm going to go anyways. So taking a camera and shooting the first quarter, first half, and getting some usable images that I'll just bank for a newsletter down the road. And we've done students. The problem when students send me a folder, they send me a folder of 500 pictures, and I'm like, okay, I need 3 that are edited, and they give me a folder of 500. I'm like, I like the effort, but a little more concise. Yeah, that part it's been good though. I like the taking pictures and the kids put them on social media, and I like the product that we're putting out.
One of my buddies created an athletic leadership class similar to how they have a student government class on their campus. And then within that, like each of the kids is assigned to a sport, which then they do some of that editing and cultivating on the front end for him as the athletic director.
Is that Brett?
No.
Okay, I know that Brett. I think it's Brett was it Dixon?
Yep, Couchy.
He was talking about doing that. We had talked at a conference one time, and he had said that he had some students doing that work. We do. We have our news, our Livingston Wolfpack news that they do when they do their daily announcements, and they do sports highlights and things like that. And every now and then we'll get some video in there, and it's good. But it's one of those things that it's on the list. I really want to push more of that down to the kids to do, but you just end up doing it.
Let me ask this because it's something that's sitting with me in the last 2 weeks. What is an area where you have realized recently that you have more legal exposure than maybe you realized as a coach or in your first run as the AD? But as the world becomes more litigious, what are some areas where you just walk around and notice things that you didn't used to notice? And the example I'll share with you is I was at a basketball camp with my son 2 summers ago, and one of my buddies was the director, and we're in this gym, and the bleachers are put up against the wall, and the rail, which is supposed to fold flat, is like sticking out, and they're playing towards this set of bleachers. And I'm like, hey man, we need to find a screwdriver. We need to move this thing. And he's, what are you talking about? I'm like, someone's gonna get hurt. You're gonna get sued. This is a bad idea. And I'm at some camp in friggin' Minnesota, like just sitting there watching.
Yeah, I don't know. It's part of just getting older. And every time I walk out somewhere, if I go to a game and I'm going to watch our team play on the road, usually the first thing I'm looking for is, do they have a trainer? Where's ice? Where's the coach's med kit? Where's the AED? Like, I don't know, risk management kind of permeates my thought when I go to events now. And it's for good reason. I think like my first couple of years as a coach, I just wanted to get out. I mean, just get out and start coaching. And I didn't care that there was a pothole over there. I didn't care that that part of the field was slippery. Let's avoid it and let's just get on to playing catch and taking BP. And I don't know. Now as an athletic director, I don't know. I see exactly and it worries me. And I try to make our coaches aware of their legal duties as 16 legal duties as a coach, that I don't care what you do. If you're ignoring conditions that are unsafe and someone gets hurt, the lawyer is going to ask you, okay, why didn't you see that pothole in the soccer field? Where were you when the team rule violation happened? Why weren't you in the locker room? All those things. And I don't know if we're perfect at it, but I probably once a week I'll throw a scenario out to our coaches in weekly email about something like that.
No, that's a great way to do it. I hadn't even thought about that. I was at our playoff football game 2 weeks ago, and we don't get to the playoffs in football very often. So we're out there early and walking around the field, and the cutouts where they had put the field hockey arc in, like one of them was missing. So it was just like sand. And I was just telling the other, hey man, you know that there's a hole over. What are you talking about? Yeah, right here. There's a hole. And he's, I didn't know, thanks. But
I got a call just on Friday. I mean, it was our first official day that we could play a soccer game, and I got a call. I was headed out to the soccer game. I get a call from our coach. Yeah, the official says there's a hole in our field that we got to fix. Okay, truck out there, call the custodian, get a truckload of dirt fill in this little hole by the goal and pat it down, roll it over, and that's a daily thing.
All right. So last question is, if you could ask any one of our AD coaching colleagues a question, what would it be? And while you're thinking about that, you get to answer the question from my last guest, which was, how do you move the job from a release period approach to full time, especially in a smaller area, right? Raphael's at Modoc High School. It's in the top north right corner of the state. And he's still got the traditional, he's a pseudo VP. He's teaching 5 classes. He's at 2 different sites, and he's the AD. And it was like, yo, how do you make this thing full time? And since you mentioned that you just went full time, I'd love to get you to lay this out for our colleagues. This is how we went about it. These are the potholes. These are the hurdles. This is what we were successful in. This is what we were not.
But you got to give me. We did part of our when we redid our stipends is we also redid our job description as an athletic director within our district. And like I said in the previous pod, it took 7 years to get over the top and to convince the powers that be that having a full-time athletic director is a good thing. And I wrote a summary of everything that we went through. I'll give me his email. I'll forward it to him. And this is what we had to go through in terms of our union, and then how we would convince our district office personnel and also our site personnel in terms of who's responsible for what. But big picture transitioning, it's okay. The job duties of an athletic director are X. And if you are a part-time athletic director and you're teaching 5 core classes and you're coaching and you're a full-time, okay, these are the job duties as an athletic director. Who's going to do the last 10 of them?
Mhm.
Because if you're teaching, if it's in the spring and you got rainouts and you got people calling you to reschedule games, baseball, softball games, who's answering the phone? Because I'm in class teaching an AP US history class. I can't stop and do that. So I think identifying what are the actual job duties of the athletic director and who's going to pick up the slack when you're teaching, that's really important. And then also, I think the thing that was, I think, powerful for us is that we made a list of, okay, athletic director management things and then athletic director leadership ideas. We want the athletic director to be the leader for victory with honor. We want the athletic director to set up a great athletic recognition program within our school. We want to do all these like leadership things, but who's going to do the managing things? Who's going to make sure we have buses? Who's going to put in the officials? So I think identifying, okay, everything that needs to get done within the athletic department. And if you're not a full-time AD, who's going to do that other stuff? Because
Mhm.
there's only so much time in the day.
Mhm.
That was beneficial for us. It was a little bit of a leap of faith in terms of, okay, we got what we asked for. And now our work year increased. We went from 184 days to 224 days,
Mhm.
which is significant. But
Mhm.
in terms of when we're clearing kids in the summer, when we actually need to be at school to do the work that needs to get done, it's not during the traditional 184-day teacher contract. Be here in July. If we're going to start football practice in July, we got to be here.
Yeah.
So I think the more you can communicate with your senior leadership at the district office, it was challenging for us because we had 6 athletic directors in our bargaining unit, and our
Mhm.
bargaining unit is made up of over 500 teachers. So
Mhm.
our bargaining for 6 people to do this job that was a little complicated, but it got to a point, I think, that with our district and with our teachers union, that it was like, hey, good, let's do this, and
Right.
it's been good so far.
What it I don't know that you know this, but where would you if you could speculate, or even if you do know it, where do they find the money to do that, right? Because that's 6 teachers now that they got to hire to teach the classes that you were teaching before.
Yeah. I don't know it. And obviously, in a bigger district, there's probably more wiggle room than a one school, like a one town, one school district. But the other side of it is sometimes you have to you pay for what you get. And in terms of what we were just talking about, in terms of risk management, if you spread those duties out to multiple people and you don't have someone who's solely responsible for checking athletic eligibility or transfers or assessing your facilities from like a risk management standpoint, then it's not win. You're going to get sued at some point. You're gonna have to bite the bullet. So pay now or pay later.
What really quickly, and I don't want to undermine the cause, but what's changed from when the standard was a release period and maybe a stipend to now it seems like the push for full time has taken over. What's shifted in your mind having done it for so long?
I think we're seeing an increase in transfers in our section. We've seen it for the past 4 or 5 years where those have ticked up. Just I don't know what in the Central Valley, there's more of a transient. People are moving from town to town based on housing availability. And whereas the first couple of years at Merced, maybe I do 5 or 6 transfers a year, and maybe 1 or 2 of those were pretty complicated. Now it's 10, 12, 15, 20. And I think that part has gotten a little bit more complicated or requires a little bit more time. I know at Livingston, we've seen an increase in athletic participation from 25, 30% to upwards of 45% of our student population being involved in sports. So clearing kids, making sure that they have insurance, making sure that they're good to go day one. That's an increase in time. I don't know if that answers your question, but
It does. I just remember when I started at El Camino and Baxter was the AD, he was teaching 4 classes. He had a release period for his fifth. And so he basically had on a 6 period day his prep and his release period to do his AD responsibilities, right? And now I think if you go back to that site, they have a full-time person that does it, right? So it was more along the lines of I know how important it is. I'm blessed that I'm in a situation where I have that support. I just wrestle with why it's not front of mind for some of these other districts. And it's probably because we've always done it this way, right? And it's you have 17 assistant principals. Why can't you have one athletic director, right?
yeah, when I started at Merced, we taught 3 periods and we had 3 periods of release, and then you could also coach. And as we transitioned to full-time athletic director, they took off the coaching, and I think that's good. I think it's really hard to be. It's hard to be at every game if you're actually coaching. It's hard for me if I'm coaching golf to be at a water polo event, watching our coaches coach and making sure the event is run correctly. And I know from a like from an athletic director standpoint, we're in charge of clearing our own coaches in our district. And when I started coaching for our district in 1993, we had three coaching requirements. We had CPR, first aid, and we had like bloodborne pathogen training. Okay, now in our district, we have, I think, 24 different certifications that our coaches have to go through. And we're in charge of monitoring that they get through every single one of those. And before they step foot on the court, all those have a completion date. And that alone right there, in terms of our district, that takes a lot of time. That's a process for clearing 50 or 60 coaches a season.
Yeah, that's wild. We can talk about that later. All right, last question. What is it that you would ask if given the opportunity of any of our colleagues?
I'd be curious to hear from colleagues about if they think about their traditional work week, how much time they spend leading the athletic department as opposed to managing the athletic department. And I think everybody goes into the position thinking that they're just going to be this like 90% leader, 10% manager. And throughout the year and various times of the year, I think it fluctuates. But I like that question. And everybody wants to be out front leading, and you can't do that effectively if you're not managing it. So that'd be a kind of a question I'd love to hear.
That's a great question. And stay tuned for the next episode when we get some sort of answer. Thanks, Coach, for being on today. I appreciate you taking the time.
Hey, thank you. Appreciate it.